Right now, it looks like the tropics have shut down across the Atlantic, with no hurricanes as we head into Labor Day weekend. In this video, I'm about to show you why there aren't any hurricanes right now, where more tropical action is going on, and when the Atlantic will heat up once again. But first, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new here for more tropical weather updates. So here's a look at the NHC tropical weather outlook. The Atlantic is pretty quiet, but we do have a disturbance with a 30% chance of formation in the next 7 days. In the eastern tropical Atlantic, a tropical wave is forecast to emerge off the west coast of Africa on Sunday. Thereafter, environmental conditions could support some slow development of this system while it moves westward to west-northwestward at around 15 to 20 miles per hour across the eastern and central tropical Atlantic next week. And the forecast models are showing potential with this. And then over the next couple weeks, there could be a couple other tropical waves moving into the main development region that do have some potential, but this storm right here, actually, it looks like it's going to be a fish storm and is not expected to become a significant hurricane at all. But technically, we should be going towards the peak of hurricane season. So for late August to early September, this is pretty quiet. And here's a look at the GFS model showing, as you can see, not a whole lot happening across the Atlantic. We have a big area of high pressure right here. That's part of what's contributing to a lack of activity. And then we do have a lot of frontal systems moving off the east coast of the U.S. and the jet stream producing a lot of shear and unfavorable conditions. But notice what happens. We do have that tropical wave that moves off the coast of Africa, and then by September 3rd, this could actually be a tropical depression, it looks like, according to the GFS. But then notice what happens. It quickly gets sheared apart, and by September 7th, it's not doing anything at all. And that's pretty much the end of it. Now, it does actually go further west towards the southwestern Atlantic, where it could have some potential if it's able to go into an environment with low wind shear, but that's pretty much as far out as the forecast model run goes. By September 14th, we're still not looking at anything else happening in the Atlantic on the GFS model. We do have the Central American gyre region with a lot of rain. Last week, it looked like going into the beginning of September, we could see a potential storm system. That has been taken away, and the forecast models are not showing activity in the Gulf or the Western Caribbean. They are showing activity in the Eastern Pacific, though. Now, here's the Euro model, actually intensifying this tropical wave a lot slower. And by September 3rd, we only have still a strong tropical wave. But as we go through the week, this turns into a tropical depression, potentially a weak tropical storm out in the main development region. Then it could reach the northeastern Caribbean by Wednesday, September 10th. So this is a long way out. This could happen or it might not. But in any case, it's actually a pretty weak storm system until we get to September 12th, September 13th, and it actually intensifies into a strong tropical storm, potentially even a hurricane, in the same place that Hurricane Aaron went, actually east of the Bahamas. From there, it could turn and kind of follow the east coast of the U.S., but not make a direct landfall, or it could go further west. It depends on what happens with this area of high pressure and this low pressure system. It could end up going in between the two. And then we also had around September 9th-ish, a potential subtropical system in the central Atlantic. But other than that, even the Euro model is not showing much of anything except one tropical system out in the main development region from this tropical wave. So we will have to watch that tropical wave for potential development and see where it goes over the next couple weeks. But other than that, the main development region is not looking very impressive, and neither is the rest of the Atlantic, according to the forecast models right now. Here's the Euro ensemble model. Here's our tropical wave. It does have significant potential to try and develop next week for the first week of September. And then after that, it looks like the ensembles are really fanning out on where this could end up. It could pretty much vanish and get sheared apart, or it could go further west, but it looks, for the most part, the forecast models are keeping it out in the Atlantic. But who knows? This could turn into something more significant down the road, but we're not seeing a whole lot of activity right now. The Euro ensemble model does kind of take the storm system out into the open Atlantic, but you never know what can happen as this storm actually starts to form. The AI Euro model also shows some slight potential with it next week, but then it really vanishes. Then you have another tropical wave near Cape Verde afterwards around September 8th, and then that goes directly north and actually hits the Azores at the same time that it merges with a pretty powerful extratropical storm system out there in the Atlantic. But then we don't have any tropical activity other than that in the Atlantic on these forecast models going all the way into September 13th on the AI Euro model. We do have a lot of rain in the Western Caribbean and the Central America region. Part of what's going to be a problem is that the tropical Atlantic is pretty dry. You still have a lot of that dry air in place, not so much of the Saharan dust, but just dry, stable air from this massive high pressure area that's over the Atlantic, which will push things west, but it also pushes down a lot of that dry air and unfavorable conditions. As you see, the tropical wave, it does have a lot of moisture when it moves off the coast of Africa, but then it runs into all that dry air, and there's a lot of wind shear. The mid-level winds are pretty strong coming out of the south, pushing north, and that's going to pull all the moisture from this storm system into that dry air. And it's not expected to do much of anything after that. As you notice, pretty dry across the Atlantic. Even if we take a sounding, as you can see, there is moderate wind shear, which is not favorable, and also the humidity is not great either, especially the further west it goes, the worse it gets. You have that shear around the same, but humidity going down to around 45%. And then once it's at this point, you have still moderate wind shear, but just really dry air is going to be the main thing that's going to be a problem. And that continues going all the way into the middle of September. But you do see a lot of moisture consolidating in the Western Caribbean and around the Central American gyre. So that will be something to watch going forward. But the main development region, which produces most of the storm systems going into late August and September, where we should be seeing a lot of tropical activity, we're not. Another thing is going to be the wind shear. Notice there is a lot of above average wind shear across the main development region on the GFS model. It stays the same, but then you do see an area of lower wind shear that does open up in the Atlantic just north of the main development region. So not in the main development region, but if a storm system pulls to the north, it could be in a more favorable environment. And then you see some much lighter wind shear moving into the central part of the tropical Atlantic going into mid-September. So things might be going to change over time, but still very unfavorable over the next several days. And it looks like even over the next week or two, not super favorable in the Atlantic. And climatologically, we are going towards the climatological peak of the hurricane season that happens on September 10th. Here's September 1st, where we should be seeing a rapid increase in tropical activity in the last half of August going into September, but we're not seeing that. We have that big high pressure system over the Atlantic that's bringing in all that dry, stable air, and also the MJO is going to be a factor too for the Atlantic, and it's very unfavorable right now, but each hurricane season is going to be a little bit different. Even last year, there was almost a month without any tropical activity from mid-August to September, and we actually are ahead slightly of even where we were last year. We're slightly ahead of 2019, which also managed to have 18 named storms. So just because it isn't extremely active right around the climatological average peak of the hurricane season doesn't mean that the season's shut down forever or anything like that. We're definitely expected to see things heating up, even if it's a little bit later in September. Still looking at significant activity that's pretty likely to happen at some point. We'll see. But there is tropical activity happening in the Eastern Pacific. Here's the latest tropical weather outlook for the Eastern Pacific. We have 2 disturbances with a high chance of tropical cyclone formation the next 7 days. We're looking at disturbance 1. This is the first one, Invest 93E, a weak area of low pressure located in the Eastern Pacific. Could turn into a tropical depression early next week as it goes west or west-northwestward around 10 miles per hour in the central to western part of the East Pacific. Formation chance through 48 hours is 40%. In the next 7 days, it's 70%. So this has a high chance of becoming something. It's not going to impact land areas. We'll have to see if it moves as far west as Hawaii. Probably not, but we'll be watching that. And then disturbance 2 is expected to turn into a tropical depression by the middle of next week as it moves west-northwestward at 10 to 15 miles an hour. Expected to stay offshore of the coast of Mexico, so not expected to make any direct land impacts there as of right now. The formation chance through 48 hours is 20%, and the formation chance through 7 days is 70%. So we're looking at that one also. And here's what we have on the GFS model. We have this disturbance, that's disturbance 1, Invest 93, expected to become a tropical system going into next week, and then also another tropical system. That this one actually looks a lot bigger. This other one is a lot more compact, so this disturbance 2 might actually intensify a little bit slower than disturbance 1, just because of the size of it, and it might take a little bit longer to develop before it hits a lot cooler water temperatures. But still, it looks like it's going to be bringing a lot of moisture up into Southern California and Arizona, possibly even a little bit further north. We'll have to see. And that's towards the end of next week, going to Friday, September 5th. And then that could continue into the weekend a little bit, kind of the middle of the week all the way to the weekend. And then we have another tropical system possibly forming behind that one, going from around September 7th, September 8th, going into the middle of September before that one kind of moves into cooler waters and tones down. But then we have the potential for another tropical system. It's going to be the Eastern Pacific and possibly the Central American Gyre region. This actually happened earlier this year, even several weeks, a couple months back. We had the MJO, which that's what I'm going to show next. We had the MJO over the Eastern Pacific and what looked like the Central American Gyre region, but we didn't really see a whole lot of activity in the Atlantic side. We saw it in the Eastern Pacific side, so it looks like that's going to happen again. Here's the MJO forecast showing right now it's unfavorable over both the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic, but even with that, we are seeing disturbances. So that's something to keep in mind. And then notice as we go to September 3rd, we start seeing more favorable conditions moving into the Eastern Pacific right here. The Atlantic is still unfavorable, and then we have that continues all the way into September 8th. Going into September 13th is when we really see the Eastern Pacific and the western half of the Atlantic under very favorable conditions from the MJO, while Africa is actually unfavorable, so not looking at so many tropical waves happening there. The MJO, it slides over throughout the next couple weeks. Then once we get into mid-September, it just kind of stays in place over the Eastern Pacific and the Western Atlantic. But then things do finally become more neutral to slightly favorable over Western Africa, so we might start seeing some more favorable conditions happening for the Atlantic as we go towards the mid to later part of September. So there could be a little while before things really heat up in the Atlantic, so it could be a later peak to the hurricane season. That's possible. And then things still pretty favorable over both the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic all the way into September 23rd. And then we'll have to see what happens as we go into October. But that's kind of what the MJO looks like on the CFS model. Here's the Euro Ensemble forecast showing something a little bit different. Going into the middle of next week, we start seeing these slightly favorable conditions over the Eastern Pacific, but still very unfavorable over the eastern part of the Atlantic, the main development region, Africa. Looking at sinking air, remember all that dry, stable air with the Atlantic high pressure system. Not looking favorable for tropical activity, but then we do have the Eastern Pacific, looking at some stuff happening there, and then it gets unfavorable over the Eastern Pacific. Then we might see nothing in both the Atlantic and East Pacific. We could still see activity even if we're in an unfavorable MJO, because that's just one factor. We have localized conditions. If you are able to get a tropical disturbance over those sea surface temperatures, which are very high as well, in an area that has light wind shear and enough moisture that it's able to survive, we can see some tropical activity happening. It's like Hurricane Aaron did have to run into some dry air, but it was powerful enough to not get completely annihilated by all of that. So it is possible to have that happening, but yeah, the Euro ensemble forecast is still showing unfavorable over both the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic. I don't know about that, but that's what they're showing going into mid-September. So we'll have to see what happens there. The GEFS is also showing the same thing, and they're a little more favorable around September 2nd, September 3rd, middle of next week before it kind of gets unfavorable over both. So we'll have to see what happens with that. The Climate Prediction Center is watching for week 2, September 3rd to September 9th, a 20% chance of tropical activity in the main development region, but a 40% chance, over 40%, in the Eastern Pacific. So that's where we're going to see a lot of that activity. But then as we go towards the middle of September, so this is going to be, it's going to be a couple weeks, it looks like, before we get some more significant stuff happening. Week 3, September 10th to September 16th, we have a 40% chance of tropical formation in the main development region, so it heats up a little bit more, and this could impact the Caribbean. We'll see about that. And then the Eastern Pacific still active with a 20% chance, but also another 20% chance of formation around the Central American gyre. As I showed with, for example, the GFS model and even the AI Euro model, showing a lot of that moisture consolidating around the Central American gyre, it's not going to be too difficult to get some tropical activity out of that, especially if the MJO is right there. That's the thing that I think could actually kick off some activity as we go into mid-September. If this forecast right here holds true, since I did show even in the previous video that, yeah, we're going to have a temporary shutdown for the tropics, that going into the very end of August, things would shut down. But then as we would go into September, things could heat up again. Looking at the Central American gyre, but it looks like that could hold off until closer to the middle of September for more tropical activity. So yeah, that's pretty much it. If you liked this video, please be sure to hit that like button if you haven't already, share the video, and make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications for more weather updates on the tropics. Thanks for watching. Extreme Weather Zone, out.